Thank you, gentlemen, for sparing time with us. We just heard an excellent panel on reaction of corporate tax directors to the BEPS. And Pat, you mentioned about the issue of harmonization, and that came out as a concern from the few tax heads. At the same time, you talked about a world before BEPS and whether harmonization was happening at that time. Some comments on that, Pat?
Well, look, I think my point during the panel was it is a mistake, I think, for tax professionals, whether they be within companies or practitioners, to think that the atmosphere prior to the OECD's initiative was a stable one. So the notion that we had a stable set of rules that countries were uniformly applying is simply not reality. And what's more, I think, from our perspective, the situation was becoming more unstable. And so an initiative like BEPS, it's easy to look at something like BEPS happening, the BEPS initiative, and if you will, blame it for the state of what we're seeing today. I think BEPS was in some sense both a reaction to what was already happening and frankly an attempt by the OECD to bring some sort of a rational framework to that. I don't know that it's going to succeed, so I'm not naive, but I do think there's an attempt there to try and bring some sort of a holistic framework and some rules of the road to guide things going forward.
Right. Peter, you've been with the industry for many years and now on the consulting side. If you look at BEPS and the implementation, OECD went through an extensive process of consultation with industry. They looked at the concerns and we have different action plans eventually being panned out. On the panel, however, today we heard several concerns from the corporate tax directors. What are the 2 or 3 concerns which according to you are very difficult, from a corporate tax director's point of view and even from a consultant's point of view?
Well, I think the biggest concern is that the BEPS action plans are not themselves going to be law anywhere. You have to have the individual countries implement those rules. And in that process, we are going to get the disharmony that Pat described. Let me point out action item 4, which is interest deductions. There, the proposed methodology from the OECD is very, very thoughtful, very, very professional, and very, very complex. No country in the world could implement the full proposal, not the United States, not the UK, no one. So the question is, as countries read the action item 4 and try to adapt it to their needs, what's going to happen? I think what's going to happen is you're going to get a variety of different rules in a variety of different countries. Now that's no different than what we've been living with in the past, but we don't get the harmony, the consensus, the efficiencies that we all would like to have out of the BEPS proposals. As advisors, the challenge is figuring out what advice you can give that is uniform enough for a client to implement it and yet flexible enough that they can adjust when Italy goes one way, Argentina goes a different way. So you try to be useful to your client, try to be helpful to the client, but you have to caveat that here's the middle of the road, the average approach that will likely work, but we have to be very sensitive to countries that say, no, I'm taking a slightly different approach.
Right. Pat, a question, when you've been talking to the senior management, the leadership, how do you explain BEPS to them? Because even for tax professionals, it is quite difficult to understand. For business leadership to understand and then translate into action, what are the 2 or 3 messages that you have given internally in the business?
Well, look, I think these guys read the paper, right? So they see the reality of taxes very much in the headlines and stories around taxation and risks associated with being branded somehow, a not good actor, a not good corporate citizen. That's their framework, that's their entering point. So obviously the things that we look to emphasize with management are, this is how we are managing risk, this is how we are thinking about the substance we need to have in jurisdictions to ensure that if in fact questions begin to get asked, we can explain why we have employees in a particular jurisdiction or why we are earning income in a particular jurisdiction. But it does really go back to a pretty fundamental point that one of the panelists made, which was, if you are engaged in international commerce, you are engaged by definition in tax planning. You have to be engaged in tax planning. And I think my management understands that. But nevertheless, there's an education process that we need to continue to do with management to make sure they understand that this is very much focused on making sure we do everything we do the right way, and we're very committed to that.
Right. Peter, CBCR public disclosure was one of the key points which was discussed on the panel, whether it comes through regulators or through leaks. What's your take on this? Do you think eventually either the tax regulator or some other regulators will push for public disclosure of CBCR data?
I don't think there's any doubt at all. The only question is how fast. And my own guess is that one of the NGOs will set up a website to collect all of the C/C reports, and we'll post them as they're received. And that before too long, you're going to have literally thousands, 2,000 or 3,000 C/C reports posted on a website somewhere, available to everybody. I'm not decrying that. That's life. I think it's unfortunate because I think there'll be a lot of misunderstanding from that has to be corrected. But anyone who believes it's not going to be public is naive.
Are you also preparing the documentation, assuming that it will eventually go public? Is that the approach?
We're preparing the documentation to comply with what the OECD has requested. I think what happens beyond that is not something we can control. That's just a reality that will play out over time. So it's the best we can do.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.